All righty. Good day, everyone. We're so happy to have you with us today, and we thank you for joining us for this Engineers Week 2021 webinar, Creating Inclusive STEM Experiences. My name is Dr. Michael Smith, and I'm your moderator today. I'm a board member with Discovery, and I'm also a STEM education, diversity, equity, and inclusion advocate as well. And Discovery has a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and engaging our community through webinars like this. Discovery provides a myriad of STEM resources and programs that support volunteers, including educators, and the youth that we serve. And we actively engage all youth in collaboration with our partner engineering organizations and societies. Today's panelists will be sharing with you their stories, their experiences, and their insights on how our broader network can be very intentional in creating inclusive STEM experiences for our youth. Before we get started with the questions, I would like to introduce the panelists that are with us today. We have Jocelyn Jackson, who's the national chairperson of the National Society of Black Engineers and a second-year doctoral student in engineering education research at the University of Michigan. You all can give her a virtual hand. Then we also have Vasana Maniratana, who's also an engineer at Intel Corporation and a champion of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS's Entry Point program, and she's also a member of the Society of Women Engineers. Then finally, we have Hector E. Rodriguez-Hammonds. He's a PhD candidate in the Department of Engineering Education at Purdue University. His bachelor's and master's degrees are in computer engineering, and he's also a member of the National Organization of Gay and Lesbian Scientists and Technical Professionals, known as NAGLSTAP. So happy to have our panelists with us today. So to get started, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to share a little bit about themselves, give you a little bit of background on their STEM experience as youth, and some of the things that they're currently doing in this space. And we'll start with Vasana.
Hey, everybody. Well, thank you, Dr. Mike, for the introduction. I am currently an engineer at Intel Corporation, but I'll tell you that it doesn't define me because I've had a very interesting ride along the way, some ups and downs. I was born with lots of health problems, and that kind of puts you in a category where you have physical limitations. And in that physical limitation, when you're growing up, you have limitations until like maybe what you can do. I had poor parents, they were immigrant parents. And so all of that kind of led to where this nonlinear path where I am today. I obtained my PhD. I did research abroad. I've worked on spacesuits. I've worked on lunar space shuttle tiles. I'm working on semiconductor chips and next generation things for AI. And so that's kind of the really wonderful part when you bridge all these different things about life and what kind of identifies you as an engineer is just having that grit, having the creativity of trying to do things with a health challenges, and as well as just kind of wanting to kind of bring it all together as something motivating. And I think engineering was kind of that for me.
That's absolutely great. Thank you, Vasana. Next, we'll hear from Hector.
Thank you. So I self-identify as a gay, male, Latino, immigrant, ADHD having computer engineer. I attended 2 community colleges and 2 state universities in Florida before graduating with my bachelor's in engineering, computer engineering. And my curiosity regarding how computers worked as a kid, and also the influence of a couple of my uncles who are engineers, are part of what led me to pursue computer engineering and eventually to pursue it in grad school at Purdue. And about a year into the PhD program in electrical and computer engineering, I decided instead to get a master's, at which point around I applied to the PhD program in engineering education. And I was driven at that time to understand how I came to be an engineer. And I was always interested, even in undergrad, regarding why our educational system was the way that it was, why we were studying what we were studying to achieve these degrees. So around the same time I was starting to satiate these curiosities in the PhD program, I came out as gay. And so coming out to myself, to my friends, and eventually to my family led to a very deep deconstruction of who I am, of my identities, that then eventually culminated in some of my roles as an activist for the LGBTQ plus community, led to a deconstruction of what it means to be a Latino in this country, a Latino engineer, especially coming here to the Midwest for the first time outside of Florida, outside of Miami, and eventually culminated in what I'm studying for my dissertation.
Wow, that's an amazing background. And I tell you, as we get into the questions later, it's going to be interesting to see how all of the components of those things that make you and each of us who we are feed into kind of your love and desire to engage in engineering and those experiences. Thank you, Hector. Now we'll hear from Jocelyn.
Yes, so hi everybody. It's amazing to be here with you all today, also sharing the stage with these two lovely panelists as well as Dr. Mike. I can say for me, currently I am getting my PhD in engineering education research where I specifically look at advancing equity in STEM and STEM entrepreneurship. My research dives deep into how systems of oppression, so racism, sexism, classism, ableism, etc., how those either disadvantage and hinder racially minoritized populations from gaining social mobility in these areas. Prior to this, I actually got my bachelor's degree and master's degree at Iowa State University, where I worked on a project funded by the FAA where I was creating super hydrophobic and icephobic coatings for airport runway applications. It's just fancy words for coatings that repel both ice and water. As a Black woman, especially from a lower SES background, I wasn't able to connect how my experiences in the classroom and my research really made the people around me have better lives, essentially. I just didn't see how I was going to be able to help my community with my engineering degree. And so being the only one in this space, I went to Iowa State, originally from Iowa, not used to having a lot of diversity in the spaces that I've been in. However, I really think that that helped me be resilient and find the right circle. At Iowa State, I ended up joining the NSBE chapter. And if it wasn't for the NSBE chapter, I would not be an engineer. I feel so indebted to this organization that now I chair the full society in order to make my goal is just to make everybody's world a better place. And so that's a little bit about me, my background, and how I got here and why I do what I do.
Wow, that's an awesome story as well. So as we jump into the questions, the very first question, I actually believe I want all of you to answer because I think it sets the groundwork. And actually, Hector, one of your part of your original response kind of speaks to this. And so I'll start with, how did each of you discover engineering? And we actually had a question in the Q&A that this will address immediately. And if you could talk about, if you can also mention the age, if you can recall at which you kind of discovered what engineering was and that there might be an interest. And when did you know that you wanted to pursue engineering? So let's talk about the age and how you discovered. We'll start with Hector.
How did I come to engineering? In elementary school, I was interested in cars, how they came to be, how they were designed. I had a couple of uncles as well, like I mentioned, one a mechanical engineer, the other one an electrical engineer. And I think both of them always emphasized my tendency to want to deconstruct the universe around me, a lot of man-made things, right? And so I think they stoked a lot of that curiosity. And when it came time to decide what I wanted to study for undergrad during college, one of my uncles sat me down and we talked about finances and which degrees he thought it was by and large, I think, a financial decision. The top three contenders were being a math teacher, even though I was terrible at math, studying engineering, computer engineering, because I was good at computers, or dentistry, but that would take a little long, I think. Yeah.
Wow.
So
and what age?
yeah.
And what age?
that we were talking about, that was probably 18 years old, just at the cusp of starting to go to school. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But then, of
Okay.
course, as a kid, always wanting to know how things worked, why they worked that way. So there was always kind of a curiosity for the world around me. And I think that matched with what they knew about themselves as professionals. They thought it would kind of make a good fit. So
Exactly. I think that's a common experience of all engineering students, no matter what your background is. They kind of discovery and I want to touch, feel, deconstruct. I think that's a very common, lineage between all of those many engineers. Jocelyn, how about you?
Yeah, so for me, my story is a little bit different. I kind of had a late start. In middle school, I really didn't see the value of education. I thought learning was uncool because that's what the people around me said. And so I really didn't try. And I got to a point where my mom had to sit me down and, talk about the sacrifices that she gave for us to be where we are, and that she didn't want us to waste her sacrifices. And so I remember after that conversation with my mom, I started to create these very big dreams for myself. Um, I said I wanted to be a cardiologist. I don't know where I got that from, but anyways, I don't like needles or blood. And doctors kind of had this crazy sleep schedule too, and I do appreciate my sleep. So that didn't work out for me. However, it was junior year, where I was considering graduating high school early, and I wanted to leave high school essentially and get a job. And my mom said, no, you need to stay in school. And she always told me that I was going to go to college, so I needed to figure out what I was going to college for. Um, I ended up taking this Project Lead the Way course that was recommended by one of my high school counselors. I took this course senior year, and I remember being in the classroom and being one of two women, the only Black student in the class. And I kind of said, wow, doesn't seem like there are many people that look like me in this space. But I remember that we got to use CAD software to create parts of a train. And then we got to 3D print them. And I just thought it was so crazy how we literally started with just this blank screen and was able to create something. And then now it's sitting on my desk in front of me. I didn't even know what engineers did. And so I'm like, had a few conversations, and they're like, mechanical engineering is pretty broad. You should go do that. So I just listened to my high school teacher at that time, and he encouraged me to go into engineering and said that I could do it. And when I talked to my mom, she said that I could do anything that I wanted as well. And so that's how I got my engineering start. I see that Dr. Mike probably had some technical difficulties, so I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Vasana.
Hey guys, so how did I discover? Well, if you asked me this question, probably when I was before my 20s, I would say that I wanted to do anything that was not owning a restaurant. So at that time, my parents were owning a restaurant. We had a mom and pop restaurant in a small town in Florida, and that's where I'm from. And then I think the answer after about 20 more years later is probably linked with a bunch of different things. But when did I make that actual decision? It was definitely late in life. I said I would declare myself into majoring in engineering, and I went into material science and engineering. But that came because there was a journey of just really liking everything. Actually, I loved art, I loved science, I loved history. I didn't mind math. It's math. I don't know if maybe some people love it, but I liked it all. And the idea was engineering had all these different disciplines, and it had this kind of track where you could combine it all. But some of the most influential engineers that carved out our history had the intersection of art and creativity, as well as the mathematics and science, and just combining it all to find solutions. And so when you couple that with having health problems, maybe wanting to get out of working at a restaurant, and also just wanting to kind of see the world and do different things, that's when I chose engineering. I didn't even know what that meant. I marched myself down to the department and said, I would like to join your department. At that time, things were probably different in the way things were done in college. And then it was pretty interesting because the lady just looked at me and was like, I don't think so. And it's like, what? And so after all of that came about, I just worked my butt off to try to prove that I could be here and I could do different things, new projects. And it's just kind of led me down a really fun path. And then later on, I found the American Association for the Advancement of Science Entry Point program that really is an interesting, amazing conduit that kind of identifies brilliant disabled engineers. And we could talk about either mental or physical, visible or non-visible, and gave them more opportunities to find internships, basically paving this pipeline for a whole nother subset of group that may not have been available at that time. So that's where it's at. And I think we don't have Dr. Mike still. So I don't know if Thea, you can kind of fill in for now.
Yes, hi everyone. This is Thea Saar from Discover E, and I will fill in the questions. Dr. Mike Smith told me he's having connectivity issues and trying to get back in. He doesn't want to miss this exciting conversation. But so our next question is, when we use the word inclusivity, what we're really talking about is creating a sense of belonging for students and making everyone feel welcome. When you reflect on your experiences, is there a time when someone made you feel welcome, and how did they do that? Jocelyn, would you like to take a crack at that one?
Yeah, so I guess throughout my time as a undergraduate student, I will be completely honest. I never saw myself being able to finish the degree in engineering, just because of all of the negative experiences that I had and sense of feeling unwelcome. I had very bad imposter syndrome, and I start to let all of these things. Kind of speak to my ability. And I felt like I had no ability to be an engineer. I will say that when I think about very positive experiences that I did have, where I felt extremely included in the classroom, would be my fluids course. I had the rarity, and it was really a privilege to be taught by a Black woman professor at Iowa State University in physics. And it was, I don't even know if fluids was that interesting to me. But I just know that when I was in that class, I sat first row, seat right in front of the professor, probably 3 feet away from her. And I felt like she taught to me. She looked me in my eye when she taught. She did this to everyone. She brought this different kind of environment and sense of inclusion to the classroom that I hadn't been able to feel before. She would challenge me during class. She would challenge everyone else. And it was the point to really push you to learn. She would invite everyone to office hours, and I would go to her office hours and spend time with her. I remember that I got like a lower B one time, and I was just a little bit upset with the lower B. And I remember I went and talked to her, and she said, "You can do better than this." She's like, "I believe in you. You'll get an A in your next one. Just put in the work." And it was just being able to have that type of representation, and not only representation, but just someone who cared. Sometimes when you're in these large lectures of like 100 to 300 people in your classrooms, you don't get that personalized experience, and it seems like you just are in the crowd. You're just someone in the crowd. And so I would say that was just one of the best experiences that I've been able to have. And it's amazing because I've been able to have those experiences a lot more, even here at the University of Michigan.
Wonderful. Actually, I would like to get a response from Vasana as well, if you can provide a quick response to the same question.
Could you frame it. I've been like so engaged in Jocelyn's answer.
So when we use the word inclusivity, we're really talking about creating a sense of belonging. Can you talk about or reflect on an experience or a time when someone made you feel welcome in a STEM environment, in a classroom, just made you feel welcome around engaging in STEM? And what did they do?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that when you have a non-apparent disability or you just have problems that people can't tell or something like that, sometimes the hardest thing is just to be able to tell somebody about yourself. And so I remember gathering some of the teachers I had in high school in a room and just saying like, hey guys, I'm actually going through these health problems. I'm gonna have surgery probably at the end of the school year. And I might be missing some class. I'm getting hospitalized and things like that. And just that feeling of being able to kind of explain to them and then having that connection gave me confidence for everything else. It's not like the confidence was 100%. It was just that sometimes you just needed to connect. And in that connection, even though it wasn't specifically around science or engineering or math, it was just enough to propel me to kind of do what's next, and then not feel like I was going to be left behind because I had these health problems or that I was different, because it's so easy to feel different at that age for anything you have or anything you're experiencing. And just to be a little accepted, whatever it may be, it felt like it was being an ally to whatever was kind of building inside of me around STEM.
Wow, that's amazing. I'll tell you, I had a similar situation with regards to high school math, and having an educator in my family. And I know anyone who has educators, any kind of teacher, no matter what grade level, there's always this kind of ghostly oversight saying you can do this. And I know the background. And if you're not getting it, I'm going to go talk to the teacher and I'm going to do those things to help support you. And so for me, it was that family connection, also a love for math that kind of created that connection for me. So great story. I'm going to go to Hector on the next question. As we think about creating inclusive STEM experiences, I want to talk about helping students build their STEM identity. And I know you talked a lot about your personal, all the facets of you that really create your identity. But we're going to talk about how they then impact your STEM identity. We know that giving them the opportunity to gain confidence in their abilities, helping them see the value of the field, and connecting them to role models that actually look like them all help students build their STEM identity. So my question is, what experiences or what people helped you develop your STEM identity? And how do race, gender, sexual orientation, physical abilities, or health concerns contribute either positively or negatively to that process of establishing your STEM identity?
I think when I think back on the individuals that helped me develop my STEM identity, starting from probably middle school, because I immigrated to the US when I was 4, then learned English around that time. So yeah, I remember middle school, I had a really good science teacher that challenged me and allowed me to do things in a way that spoke more to the way in which I learned or understood the world. So independent, sort of. When I think back to Calculus 3 professor, Physics 2 professor I had in community college, I think that what seems to be a common thread across individuals that helped me develop my STEM identity is some amount of them bringing out something in me, like Lasana, you were mentioning things inside of you, right? Something that's already inside of me, and then grafting it onto what it means to be, for me, an engineer or a STEM professional. And so then basically being given the freedom to explore those things, see them as valuable in the field of engineering, and then endowing me with the agency to then bring them over, right? So them valuing those things by them being the person of authority, letting me know, oh, wait, okay, so the fact that I'm gay can belong in here. The fact that I'm Latin does mean something. And then allowing me to bring those things in then I also develop, my knowledge of math, my knowledge of problem solving, and, physics and chemistry and all that.
Wow, amazing. I tell you, there's always a connection that goes back to our experiences and how it relates to STEM. And quite often when we are sharing these experiences with youth, it's about meeting them where they are in their current environment, not trying to create an environment that the world says should be, but really starting where they are makes a huge difference. Jocelyn, do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I do. It's funny because we've been doing this virtual world too long for me to start speaking on mute. So my apologies. But I guess I would say that within mine, it's been making sure that I surrounded myself with the right people that could give me the encouragement and the support that I needed to make it. Um, for instance, with Nesby, I was able to have another family away from my family. And as I got more involved in like the National Society of Black Engineers and the chapter at Iowa State, we became a family that were getting through it together. And so it wasn't just me trying to make it in STEM. I also got super involved with mentoring. They offered study halls where all of the upperclassmen would come and help us lowerclassmen with our homework that we struggled with sometimes. And it was just really building that sense of community and that familiar environment that made me feel like I could keep going. And that's why I do what I do, because I think that Nesby is an extremely important, I think it's an extremely important organization that allows people to persist in these fields. And then I got involved with like McNair and LSAM, and the director of my McNair program is truly like my second mom. We actually still keep in touch all the time. She's connected with my family, and I would go see her at least every day. And even my Nesby advisor, anytime I told them that I was at the point where I didn't think that I could do it, or anytime I went through any sort of a hurdle, whether it be financial, mental, whatever it was, they always were there to support me and let me know to keep doing what I'm doing. And it was that support that helped me bring this sense of resilience. Yeah, when you hear Hector and Basana's story, you hear us talking about these experiences and how they really created some barriers. But what you see from all of us is that we're an example that you build a certain type of resilience to make it. And I am a 100% believer in people really, your communities, your support systems, they truly help you and make you who you are to be, because it's really hard to, as a human, you cannot, we're a species, we cannot make it on our own. We can't. And
Exactly.
so I think just realizing that and asking for help when we need it.
Absolutely. So I'm actually going to go to a question. I'm going to go back to Hector for a quick question that actually came from one of our audience members. And then I'm going to then go to Vasana with a new question. But Hector, you mentioned that math, you mentioned that you were terrible in math. Many students might be afraid of the math component on the science engineering field or in the science and engineering field. Please explain how much math was a factor on your career choice and how you overcame the math issue.
All right, so I failed every math class in high school every year, and I would do them over in the summer and get my C, because that's all you needed, and I would move on. I graduated with a GPA in high school that I think it was like 2.1. So I went to community college because I applied to state universities, but no. The SAT score also wasn't there, right? So I had tremendous deficiencies in math. When I started at Valencia Community College in Orlando, I started in remedial algebra. Fractions was my issue. Once I figured out fractions, then once I had a more stable foundation, then I was able to build up, right? Then everything else. It was a total of like 7 math classes, right? Over the course of all of undergraduate school. I think even in middle and high school, I believed that I could understand these things. So one of the problems was that I was too shy to ask questions because I didn't want to seem dumb in front of everybody else. I'm good at maintaining appearances. As an only child, maybe not sure, but I'm pretty good at projecting something that I want people to see. So I was good at pretending that I kind of knew what I was doing, passing well enough. I think also then when I went to college and it was, time for more reality, my uncle would sit with me and drill me through problems and ask me to explain back what I was saying. So there was some amount of believing that I could always do it, but not having maybe the tools or the space within which to do it. And then finding encouraging support once I was in community college, both through family and through more dedicated instruction. The classes were much smaller at Valencia. I think there were 20, 25 students. And then just basically, maybe this goes back to the resilience Jocelyn mentions. I'm pretty hard-headed about things that I commit to. So while I decided to pursue engineering at 18, I finished when I was 28, right? And I never changed course, but I stopped going to school. I got a job. I came back. So it was, in part, it was that commitment as well to wanting to finish that thing that I started, because it was pretty cool.
Awesome. Before I go to the next question, Vasana, did you have any feedback to that question? I saw you nodding your head, and I know many of us at times have had to, amongst the larger group, figure out how to fit in when we felt like we had a deficiency or didn't quite get it, and we figured out how to make it work, and we persisted in order to get to where we are today. Do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, I think my feedback is I'm always like that. I mean, I don't know when I'm not feeling like, am I the only person who doesn't get it right now? And that's like happening at work. I mean, that's happening whether am I in the right field? Am I at the right place? And so I think I saw a really interesting question that kind of linked up to this is, did you feel challenges? Were you always motivated? And these panel talks are really awesome because you get a chance to hear somebody's complete story, but you don't realize that along the way you're constantly feeling a bit unsure or challenged, and you have to kind of make those choices along the way that, like, yeah, this is hard, but that's that one moment, that's that one thought. And then when we stitch all our moments together and all our perseverances, they kind of create a beautiful story. And so I really love Hector's and Jocelyn's story because it's so true. You're always being challenged, whether it's by yourself as your own worst enemy, or maybe just feeling around you that you didn't fit in. And that's part of the like amazing thing you could be proud of when you've kind of made it.
Absolutely. So I have another question for you, Vasana. We have an audience member who works with a group of girls, all of which are African American, and one is Indian or Native American. And this person tries to highlight the achievements of those particular groups, right? Blacks and Native Americans. So the question is, how do you highlight achievements of a child's race or ethnicity in engineering without making them feel like you're putting them in the spotlight, which may make them uncomfortable? So how do you help engage the experiences of the students that are in the room by acknowledging the achievements of those who are like them without making them feel uncomfortable? Maybe there's an experience that you've had or others have had in that same realm.
I think it's one of those things that, like, as an outsider, an educator, or a supporter, you want to say the most obvious thing, that you persevered, you did this, but that's not even what the kid does not want to be called out, right? I mean, we know that. I'm old enough to say I don't even want to be called out at this age, for something that specific. But I think sometimes what's interesting is being able to call out the different facets that make them really stand out, such as potentially their organizational leadership skills, or their quick, or maybe their methodical way of thinking, or maybe just how amazing purpose-driven they were about this, or even celebrating kind of the paranoia and the attention to detail that they bring. And in that vein, sometimes it's not about making your message of being able to highlight what you feel, but it's actually just adding to them and kind of giving them that extra kind of feedback, as well as to others, that these all skills that I recognize in this person that we haven't seen maybe, or that is very special in this person, is being celebrated at this moment. And so we are being very supportive of all these different facets that make somebody interested in STEAM or STEM. And we want to highlight that. And I think in that sense, it will stitch together the identity of that area. And that's how we kind of build a lot of these kind of like behind the scenes things that make a really stronger fabric.
Absolutely. Jocelyn, feedback?
No, I agree 100% with what Vasana said. And I think that more so, instructors, volunteers, should always kind of be in the mindset to not only tell students when things are wrong, but tell them when things are good. And I want to say that if that's happening on a consistent base, and that's something that's being done for everyone, I think that that's helpful in helping students who feel like they stick out for areas of their identities to not feel like they're just getting this compliment or acknowledged because of their identities. I think that consistency is the key, especially when we talk about acknowledgement.
So we're gonna shift gears a little bit. So this is a question, another question from an audience member, and I'm actually gonna ask, I think it's important to have insight from all three of you. So I'm gonna ask you all to provide feedback. As a white identifying individual, how can I aid in creating personalized connections and an impactful relationship with students who identify from an underrepresented population in STEM? Even though I create a welcoming environment and am supported verbally and non-verbally, I will never look like every student or fully understand all of their experience. How can I overcome that obstacle better? Great question. Let's start with Hector.
I think the first thing that comes to mind is approaching the situation kind of with an empty head, curiosity. How can you understand where someone else is coming from? I'm a cisgender man, so how can I start to understand or be an ally to some of the female identifying engineering students in my classroom? How can how do I open my mind to that? I ask a lot of questions, and I try to acknowledge my positioning as, a gay Latin man and what that may mean for the interaction that I'm having. And I ask a lot of questions, and I try to surround myself with other individuals like myself that are also trying to unpack our positions and the roles that we play in different spaces, than to challenge me to reflect on who I am and how I'm being seen to different people. And that then further helps me then approach other individuals that are different than me, because we're all different, right? With a fundamental sense of curiosity, so that I can actually learn and be open and practice to minimize some of, the effects that my identities do have, or other people with my identities have, right?
Right. I think that's amazing. I think the key thing I got is many of us, by human nature, potentially start from a place of assumption versus a place of engagement. So what I heard you say is, instead of maybe dealing with my own preconceived, maybe even unconscious biases, that I start with getting to know someone by really asking them questions to understand their experiences and where they're from. What about you, Vasana?
We have this term at Intel, and it's funny that I have to bring it up, but we always say, did you seek to and understand? Did you seek and understand? And so, and I think it follows a lot of what Hector was saying, the same themes of coming in there with kind of this like blank slate of trying to understand. And one of the things that I like to kind of add on, that's more my personal, that I feel like works best for someone like me, was just that one-on-one piece, whether it's I'm sitting down with somebody and seeking to understand and asking, hey, how did you make this decision? Or tell me more about why you did, or how did you get to this, And that was the same in my past experiences, when somebody would sit down and show that genuine interest in understanding, because a lot of times when you're younger, in your early years, you don't necessarily sit there and get very introspective about the decisions you make, right? They are very a bit primal, and sometimes a little short-lived too. And so having somebody invest that time to kind of pull that out of you, it's very nice, because then that conversation between the two people, the mentor and the mentee, can then stitch together some things. Maybe the mentor can ask or drive in how things connect. Oh, I see how things connect. And that creates a bit of a summary for that kind of relationship they built. Same for these days. I would do that with mentees or just employees that colleagues, and folks would do that to me. And I find those to be some of the most enriching experiences where you grow very stepwise.
Wow. So Jocelyn, same question, but I want to throw in, I like that, Hector kind of gave a global perspective. Asana kind of spoke maybe from kind of a volunteer, but kind of from that corporate engagement. And I think educators deal with this more often than not because they're in the classroom. But as you answer this question, can you speak to it specifically from the volunteerism perspective? Because I know you are a part of an organization that is made up of volunteers that actually work with students in that way. So.
Yeah. So I think the first thing that I wanted to point out is that even from a volunteer or an instructor perspective, I think that a lot of the things that we bring into these organized STEM learning environments, we disconnect a lot of the real world into these environments. And I think that it's important to tie those in some of the world events. And so, for instance, as a Black woman, it is so hard for me to show up sometimes when I have to pretend to be okay when I'm not. And no one's acknowledging or addressing what's going on in the world. A couple examples is, I remember attending Iowa State, and there was a protest when Trump came to our university, and a lot of it, things did not end so well during this protest. And I remember having to go into class the next day and it be completely ignored. And then the students around me sit at the table talking about it's about time that Iowa went red. And then when I told them my experiences, they told me racism didn't exist here. It's different when you have to watch George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, like these people lose their lives, and you have to come into work the next day. You have to sit in that meeting and act like everything is okay, and no one even brings it up. And there's other ways that you can tie in world events. You can bring in aspects of the pandemic. You can bring in aspects of climate change, because engineers and people in STEM are going to be the one that saw some of our society's biggest issues. However, I think that we've gotten to this point where it's almost considered unprofessional to bring in these events, but I think that it's genuine, and I think they have to be discussed, because engineers don't just design, build, improve, innovate systems, gadgets, machines, all of that. We have a hand in making the world a better place for everyone, and that includes whether it's the pandemic, that includes whether it is climate change, and that includes social justice initiatives. So I think that just more conversations have to be had, and we can't continue to look at world events versus what's happening in STEM as two separate entities. They have to come together.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. And it's interesting. The one thing I would add to the commentary is that a lot of times as volunteers, even as educators, we believe we have to be the one-all know-all, right? As we engage with our students. And there are so many resources and others out there that can help us with this engagement. And often that's what many of the organizations that you all represent, that's exactly what they do in working with educators and volunteers in the community. They say, we have an affinity to this particular group that you're trying to engage in with STEM, and we're here to help and be a resource to you because we know their experience. We speak from their experience, and we are STEM people, right? So here's an opportunity for you to use the resources around you, starting with Discovery, for example, to then get to the NESBs and the SWEs and the AAASs and the NIGO steps to understand that there are resources out there to help you make those connections. So those are great responses. So the next question, I'm actually going to start off with Asana. It seems like a lot of the panelists have a STEM identity and passion for engineering, and it started in college and maybe in high school. What can we do to build this love for engineering and STEM earlier, particularly for underserved students, say in middle school and elementary school? What would they have liked to have seen or have accessible to them in elementary or middle school? Asana.
Great question. I think the funny thing is I remember Jocelyn saying earlier was like, I didn't even know what engineering at a certain time or period was. And I feel the same way. And I think that one of those things is if we want to kind of bring it back to a younger years, it's more about saying the word and showing that. And then it's about building the shapes and the outlines around that, you know, and linking it to what they're doing. You see them maybe putting together a little project that we're doing in class. The word is it's engineering, right? Or it's also creativity. It's also building a solution. And so kind of building the framework early on so that you can identify that it's STEM or engineering or something like that, or that this can lead to that. I mean, those are the things that I think that maybe I was missing. I think it would have been really interesting. Are there certain projects or things? I think what's interesting is usually these team-based projects where you have a purpose driven thing that you're going to work together with folks, because then it starts highlighting specific kind of interesting attributes that everybody brings. And those attributes, as variable as they are all important to engineering or STEM or whatever you guys want to put it. And so those are the things that as we can bring it out, then we can kind of reflect on it to those individuals and show them that these words about STEM or engineering exist, and you can be this because you can stitch it all together too.
I like the stitching. That makes perfect sense. Hector, you really talked about early on about some unique experiences having come over to the US at the age of 4, I believe, and then you learned English, and then you kind of had a myriad of experiences, if you will, that ultimately led to you really engaging later on. But can you talk to the how what could have happened differently to maybe engage you at a younger age versus you said it was more like, you know, when you were kind of right before you were going into your college career?
Um, well, what I was thinking about, well, okay, so as an educator, and I've been teaching first year engineering. I've taught it a couple times here at Purdue, and that's the first year class that all the freshmen take before they matriculate into their engineering majors. I think what I'm more invested in doing is almost like creating some sort of STEM literacy. So I'm not necessarily interested in all of these students becoming engineers, but I want them to participate in the endeavor and understand what engineering is. And I think that's what I would want to do with elementary and middle schoolers, because the fundamental pieces that make me a good engineer, I think, are the same good pieces that would make me a good psychologist if I would have pursued that, which was another contending major, right, when I was 18. It's that curiosity and the bigger point I think that I was trying to make was that once these individuals understand at whatever age what engineering is or could be, they can then use that knowledge wherever it is that they end up to understand the world around them. And I think that would be what I'm mostly interested in doing, fueling their curiosity and giving them more tools with which to understand the world, whether that be math, so that they can model the world and communicate it to other people, whether that be physics, for a similar purpose, or through English, or through understanding biology, whatever, right? But I think all of these disciplines, whatever it is you approach, are just ways to understand the world. And if everyone was more literate in that way, I think we would all get a little bit further faster.
Absolutely. Modeling the behavior. I like that. That if we as volunteers and educators and those who live STEM and support STEM, but also live within our communities, can model the behavior that will excite a student, I think that's a very great starting point. We're actually going to go to our last question before we do a closeout and get final comments. And I'll start with Jocelyn. And I want you, in answering this question, think about not just maybe your own experiences, but also if you can incorporate ways that the organizations that you represent have maybe helped support and model this. So the last question is authentic hands-on engineering experiences that connect to students' lived experiences like Discovery's Future City competition and other culturally responsive projects have been shown to be effective practices for engaging students. As teachers and volunteers are leading students through these types of experiences, what advice or recommendation do you have for them to ensure student engagement? Jocelyn.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So personally, within NESB, we do the SEEK program, which is the Summer Engineering Experience for Kids, where we look at low-income areas, and we host a free 3-week program in these communities of color, like engaging young students into engineering and STEM. There's some things that can be done, such as bringing in curriculum and things that relate to them, like culturally responsive teaching practices. And then also there's this idea of social consciousness. You can bring in, and I know Dr. Mike and Vasana and Hector, we talked about this on our last call, but for instance, I'm in Michigan right now, and if you're in Flint, Flint has a water crisis. So maybe just giving some background on what's happening in Flint, and then also giving some type of project or experience, whether it's water filtration, just to show them how they can be a part of the solutions for their communities. I will say that, when I was growing up, I was actually good at math. I wasn't strong in reading, but nobody once told me that I could be an engineer. Nobody once told me that they saw me doing anything special. When I reflect on my late elementary to middle school years, one of my advisors, Dr. Donna O from NESB, which I truly love, she walks up to 8-year-olds in the grocery store and will say, "Wow, you're so attentive," or "Wow," give them some type of compliment or something that she noticed, and says, "You'll make a great engineer." And with that, it's just telling people that they can do it is one thing that you can simply do in these areas, because when you look at the way that schools are funded, they're funded based off of property taxes. And there's a racial divide when you look at school funding to access, essentially. And I think that if I could leave you all with one thing, you don't have to be a professor, you don't have to have a STEM degree, anything to promote STEM. It's literally just maybe recognizing that someone seems interested in STEM and connecting them with someone else. Maybe it's going and doing volunteering, or even if you don't have the time, maybe it's financial, because there's so many things that we can do. We all play a role, but we just have to find our one little thing that we can do that makes us fit into this puzzle to make someone's life better. And I think that, yeah, sometimes it's the really little things that truly matter.
Absolutely. Hector, any advice for teachers or volunteers who are engaging students in hands-on activities?
The things that I reflected on earlier, and as Jocelyn was talking about, I think for me it comes down to like listening and watching and then validating. So what does this individual bring? What do I hear them saying from their cultural context as who they are, perhaps, or where we are? What am I watching them do? So, and then coming up to the student or the individual and telling them that what they did, exactly these things, if you can mention them, especially if you're specific, that helps, right? Make it more relevant. What you did has relevance, and what you bring to this endeavor of science or engineering or whatever it is that you're doing can belong here, and it can belong here in these ways. And if you can communicate that, you're giving them a bridge to bring over who they are into whatever it is that they would like to pursue.
I like that.
What I was thinking.
Thank you. Vasana.
I really like what you guys both have said. And one of the things that I was just thinking about is that we don't really need everybody to just become a STEM engineer. We need to be able just to support the construct of science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. We need the allies, we need the people that believe that this is important, because each part of it plays a role, and we need to reduce or eliminate the stigma of that an engineer is this way, or a science or a math person is this way. And that's not true, right? I think one of the things about these group projects, or even just individual relationships where people are watching these folks matriculate, is that knowing that having organizational skills can be important, being attention to detail is important, having a purpose-driven way is important. All these things are not in the stigma of what it's like to be an engineer per se, but these are the things that make great people out there. And when we say that when you're working on this project and you have these skills, we're not just recognizing that you have these skills for STEM, but you have these skills to really be a really amazing human.
I like that, an amazing human. And it's so funny as a thought, before I get you all's closing thoughts, I'll bring it to the simplest terms. And typically when I talk to pre-college students, it's kind of a combination of the things that you all have talked about. And I often even tell educators, you don't have to be an engineer to know what you know about engineering. And the reality is, when I'm talking to students, I tell them everything about this world in some way is engineered. So whatever it is you like, if you like basketballs, if you like Barbie dolls, if you like cars, if you like clothes, I have a cousin who has 1,000 watches because he collects watches. Every single one of those things has engineering in it. It took engineering, it took innovation, it took thought to create that product. So anything of interest to you that may not seem like engineering or STEM, there's a connection to it. And if you can raise that interest through the connections that those students already have, that's how you gauge it. And at the end of the day, as you talked about a little bit, Vasana, it's not always about every student becoming an engineer, but it's about them understanding the engineering world and how it really impacts everything that we do. So great comments, folks. So I will get some closing thoughts. If you have a closing thought you want to leave with folks today, in about 30 to 40 seconds, we'll start with Hector, then I'll go to Vasana, then I'll end with Jocelyn. Closing thoughts.
I would just say stay curious, iterate on your practice, reflect, talk with other individuals, and then enact what you think could make things better.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hector. Vasana.
I would just say that, like, sometimes it's hard, but it's hard for everybody, and you're going to be okay.
You're going to be okay. All right, Jocelyn.
Yeah, so first, thank you, Hector and Vasana, because it's been amazing getting to know you all. And I'm inspired by you too, so thank you. And then I would say, something that I tell myself before anything, whether it's a test, whether it's a speaking engagement, I tell myself to just be you. I think that we all have these amazing differences which make us who we are, and I think that we have to learn how to embrace them and be resilient through whatever. And then lastly, I would say that, everyone has a purpose in life. Everyone has a purpose here. And I think, what are you going to do to make someone's life better? And how are you going to promote equity? I asked you to leave with that question because I think that that is truly important as we work to make the world a better place.
Absolutely. Well, let's give all of our panelists a virtual hand. We appreciate you all for your insight and for engaging today. I want to thank the audience members who participated. It looks like we had up to about 230 plus folks engage with us today. So exciting. We're here to help. We're here to be a resource. Many of the organizations that are represented through our panelists, NSBE, AAAS, SWE, NAGLE-STEP, all have websites and information as far as providing resources to support the programs that you do. And of course, Discovery has that as well. We encourage you to go to discovery.org to get information on future Engineers Week programs. We have some more programs coming up this week. Change Makers, we have Introduce a Girl to Engineering Day, and a lot of other activities that many of the organizations represented as well are involved in. So again, we thank you all for your insight. It's been a great panel, and you all have a wonderful day.